I'm excited to be joined by Colin Butler, Global Head of Institutional Capital, and Matt Blumberg, VP of Institutional Capital, both from Polygon Labs, for the fourth edition of our quarterly State of Polygon call. We'll cover several topics around Polygon, starting with important advancements in 2023 and highlights from the fourth quarter, before discussing what we can look forward to this year. The information contained in this webinar is for informational purposes only and not intended as investment advice. With that, let's jump in. So pleased to have you, Matt and Colin. So Polygon had a busy year in 2023, from technology advancements and the launch of the ZK EVM to forging partnerships with a wide range of companies across various industries, like including MasterCard, Salesforce, Deutsche Telekom, just to name a few. So I guess my first question is, what would you say were the biggest highlights or most important advancements in 2023 that really sets the stage for 2024?
Yeah, first, Heidi, thank you very much for hosting. It's a pleasure to be here. You're going to get two different perspectives, one from me, one from Matt. My perspective as the head of the institutional capital team at Polygon largely involves global finance. So one thing that I saw happening in 2023 was really the inflection point for mass adoption on the side of global finance. And I'll provide a teaser. I believe that right now there is being created a parallel financial system having largely to do with private assets that will integrate into the existing financial system. And there's a lot of financial incentives for the global economy to adopt this new way of transferring value, and it's largely on blockchain. And Polygon is, the exciting part for me is Polygon is right at the center of that. So I'm going to leave that as a teaser, and I know we'll get into it more a little later in the call.
Thanks, Colin, and thanks, Heidi, for hosting us. Yeah, I guess to provide a little bit of a different perspective, I would say that 2023 was really the laying of the groundwork for the large, mass ecosystem that we're building out here at Polygon, right? It was sort of going live with the ZK VM to start, showing what was possible. I mean, that was like a huge technical feat in and of itself at the time. It was going live with lots of other ZK VMs. So, the first handful, I think we're up to 15 or so now, chains that are building on our Polygon CDK. Names like IMX and, OKX's X1 chain, laying out sort of the groundwork for how we see this vision of the future of scaling Ethereum. So for me, it's about, it's easy to forget that like Polygon 2.0, we just announced that, 6-7 months ago, right? That's what's so exciting for me. It's the laying of the groundwork and laying out the architecture for how we can truly get this tech to a point where it scales for global adoption.
Fabulous, and perfect segue into sort of what I want to dig a little bit deeper into is some of those technology advancements, and certainly the announcement around Polygon 2.0. But first, Matt, maybe we can talk about how did the launch of the ZK EVM Layer 2 change how development teams can interact with Polygon? For example, why would a team choose to build on ZK EVM versus Polygon POS? And part two, if I may, how has ZK EVM adoption, has it underperformed or exceeded your expectations so far?
Great questions. So I think the name of the game with Polygon ZK EVM is it's really all about security, right? That's sort of like the end goal of all of the layer 2 architectures really is inheriting the security of Ethereum while being able to provide essentially like infinite block space, right? So with ZK rollups, we get there in a much more secure way where like if Bitcoin is money secured by math and cryptography, Polygon ZK EVM is block space secured by math and cryptography. You don't have to have the same level of trust assumptions you do on an optimistic rollup or on a sidechain, right? And historically, POS has sort of played this this in-between role, right? It inherits a little bit of security from Ethereum, more than just like a typical sidechain like an Avalanche, right? Or like a Solana, where they're sort of completely disconnected from the Ethereum ecosystem. The bridge is secured by stake on Ethereum L1. The validator set, the staking, all of that is sort of on the L1 through smart contracts on Ethereum. So there's more security, and then we have periodic state commitments that are posted to the ETH-L1. So there's more security than just like a classic sidechain. But POS didn't really inherit the full security of Ethereum the way that like mechanically Polygon zkEVM does. So who does that appeal to, right? Who are the more security sensitive applications? Definitely DeFi. So I think with zkEVM, what we really envision is that it can be a DeFi hub for the future Polygon 2.0 ecosystem, where if you're a gaming chain or an app chain and you need to include DeFi features because of our interoperability, you'll be able to reference zkEVM as the sort of de facto DeFi chain within the layer 2 ecosystem. So I think when it comes to which teams want to deploy there, you kind of see a mix, right? Generally speaking, DeFi teams want to deploy there. Gaming teams, on the other hand, they might want to deploy on POS, or they might want to deploy their own app chains, right? So it's really like all about inheriting the maximum level of security. We have data availability on Ethereum. We have a full-on zkEVM posting proofs to Ethereum. And so it's all about like security, security, security. This has typically been an issue for rollup, TVL scaling in the past, right? If you look at like an optimistic rollup, if I'm like an Ether whale, why would I bridge my assets to an optimistic rollup? It's just not worth the trust assumptions for me, right? I can just keep them on mainnet and I can afford to pay my fees there. But with zkEVMs, all of a sudden we have a level of security that enables institutions, whales, large, token holders to bridge their liquidity to the layer 2. The layer 2 is a much better user experience, right? Right now I have to choose between, do I want to swap my ETH for USDC on mainnet and pay really high gas fees, or do I want to do it on an L2 like Optimism or Arbitrum and induce a lot of slippage, right? With zk rollups, we kind of eliminate that issue because suddenly people are going to feel safe providing liquidity on the L2 in a way that they feel they can get the same security as they would get on the L1. Back to your question about success, has it underperformed or exceeded my expectations so far? So I think we're right. So when we launched zkEVM back in May, we had this phrase that we kind of circulated a lot called training wheels. And it really was like an accurate representation, right? The tech was ready to the degree that like it did inherit the security, but there's lots of little rough around the edges patches, right? Things like, the client software needed to support WebSockets, right? So we implemented that in like, November, and that enabled a whole new class of applications to deploy there. Things like the client software being able to handle, sufficient TPS to make gas fees reasonable. All of these little optimizations that were rough around the edges, now they're getting smoothed out. And I think, toward the end of February, we'll have our client software upgrade where we patch in a piece of software called Aragon. I'm probably losing all my audience here. And that'll really enable us to hit the scale where zkEVM is like ready for that like super high speed growth in TVL, in users, in adoption, in a way that like we've really been purposefully playing it a little bit slow this whole time. So we wanted to make sure that we had the zk tech out there, making sure that was getting battle tested. And the good news is it's done incredibly well. From here on out, though, now it's about like really adding fuel to the fire and getting the adoption curve accelerating.
So with that upgrade that you just mentioned, so is that like sort of losing or dropping the training wheels? And are we going to see widespread adoption this year, or like what's the time frame in your opinion?
It's definitely one step along the way. I would say it's the biggest piece that will enable the widespread adoption this year. Yeah, 100%. Because I mean, you can see this on ETH mainnet now. Like gas fees are just already out of control, right? And that's why you see a lot of talk about, is the layer 2 thesis actually viable, right? Like what is Vitalik's roadmap? Like we see a lot of chatter, is Ethereum going to be able to save itself this cycle, right? Of course it is. It's just like more complicated than a single monolithic chain, right? And I think like the way we've designed Polygon 2.0 and the whole architecture, it's meant to scale to whatever degree we need as a global population of potential users. So I think we'll definitely see volumes in TVL and users pick up as we see them across the space. I think zkEVM will be a very natural place for them to go.
Yeah, so you just touched upon the sort of Polygon 2.0, which you announced last year. What are the primary goals behind that, and what is it? How does it aim to advance the Polygon ecosystem as a whole?
Great question. I can hardly go 2 seconds without mentioning Polygon 2.0. Um, Polygon 2.0 is our answer to a lot of the challenges that are posed by the Ethereum scaling roadmap. So if you think about Ethereum scaling roadmap, it's really like L2 centric at this point, right? We're going to have a lot of L2s. We're going to have effectively infinitely scalable block space. And that gives you a couple of challenges on the builder side. If you want to deploy a chain, first, anywhere that you touch the ETH1 is going to get expensive. And so how can we, Polygon 2.0 is partially seeking to answer, how can we make it economically viable for the number of chains to actually scale with demand without having to pay like a really exorbitant fee on the ETH1? How do we make that viable? The other question is then around fragmentation. So historically, if you think about blockchains, and this is like, I think a pretty large pivot in the way that we think about them. Historically, the scarce commodity has been secure block space. That's why you always paid a premium for the ETH1, right? With ZK, all of a sudden we can mechanically inherit that security. And so the scarce resource is no longer secure block space. Now it's liquidity, right? And liquidity fragmentation is going to be a term that I think we hear again and again when it comes to the Ethereum scaling roadmap. And it's something that we got to solve. There's a few ways to do this. Optimism has one way with their Optimism superchain, but it's not as attractive to the builder because you have to basically hand Optimism your lifeline here, which is sequencer revenue. No team building an L2 wants to do that, right? With Polygon 2.0, they can do whatever they want with their sequencer revenue, right? But they can still tap into this ability to have like shared interoperability and seamless liquidity transfer across all the different L2s in our ecosystem. So the two challenges that we're trying to address here are, one, how do we make proof submission economically viable for a given L2 builder? And we accomplish that through recursive ZK. So we can take all of these proofs that each of these chains are submitting, combine them, aggregate them, and submit them down to Ethereum together and save everybody on costs. What's amazing about this is the network effect, right? So if you're like an existing L2 and you're submitting proofs down to Ethereum, you're paying X, right? Right now it's 50 bucks a proof, let's say. We think we can get that down to 10 cents once we hit like full utilization of our AG layer. The thing is, every incremental chain that joins makes it cheaper for every existing chain every time they submit a proof. And submitting proofs is really important because that's how users get their assets off and on the L1, right? So it enables all these L2s to submit more proofs. Like $50 to 10 cents is a huge reduction, like orders of magnitude in the expense here. So it'll enable much higher quality user experience. But every incremental chain that joins not only makes it cheaper, it's not only cheap for them, it's actually getting cheaper for everybody already in the ecosystem. So it's like a huge network effect. Same thing with liquidity, right? Liquidity begets liquidity. If you're LPing in like a Uniswap pool or whatever DeFi protocol you want to be in, you want to do it where volumes happen, right? That's how you earn your fees. And volumes are going to go where the most liquidity is. So as a result, like if I'm deploying my app chain in a place where I want to get access to large amounts of liquidity, I can do it in the Polygon ecosystem, and I can get access to all of the liquidity that exists across Polygon ZKVM, across X1, across IMX ZKVM, Canto, like all of the Polygon 2.0 chains will feed liquidity amongst each other seamlessly. So it's this sort of vision of the world where it actually becomes economically viable to have like unlimited scaling at the block space in the block space vertical, and then infinite or seamless liquidity in the liquidity vertical as well, where you're going to get access to all of the liquidity across all the chains seamlessly. It'll be a really easy user experience. That's Polygon 2.0 in a nutshell.
Excellent. Well summarized. And with Polygon 2.0, you're going to introduce this hyper-productive token called Pol. So what is Pol? What are key features, and like how does it differ from Matic?
Thanks. Yeah, this is one that I think we probably could have telegraphed a little bit better to the market. So Pol is really like the way that I think about it is it's an upgrade to Matic, right? So we had Matic, and the vision for Matic was always to be used across multiple chains, right? And back in the day, we launched Matic on the Binance Launchpad, right? And we had this idea that every time there was a new chain released, it was going to increase the total circulating supply or the total FTB by like 8% or something. And so you can imagine we have Polygon POS as the first chain, and then we have Polygon zkVM as the second chain, and that would, like, releasing the next chain would automatically increment the FDV of the token to help us do things like incentivize activity, bootstrap liquidity, network effects, all of that, and then also to help people build out projects within our ecosystem through grants, right? When we took this approach to Binance, there was some pushback. Like, you can't have a mint button on your token. People are not going to feel safe if you do that. And I think that's pretty valid, because how do I know you're not just going to print infinite supply, right? And so we kind of reached like this compromise where we start with Matic, and that was really meant to be just for the POS chain. And then now that we've released our plans and kind of updated our architecture for Polygon 2.0, we need a way to have a little bit of increased supply as we go forward, right? Because it's just like it's multiple chains, right? So I think the way that I think about it is it's an upgrade. It's like one-to-one. We have the contracts live. You can swap your Matic for Pol, and it's going to be up to the community the degree to which they like when they want to do it, right? I would say that the economically optimal time to do it is when Pol becomes the staking token for Polygon POS. So with Pol, we have this staking hub. That's a big, like a very core part of the Polygon 2.0 architecture. And we did this for a reason. And the reason is it's very difficult as a builder to bootstrap the crypto economic security that your network might need on its own. And we've seen this before. We've seen it with shared security on Cosmos, for example. We've seen it with Polkadot, right? But the key difference is that this is sort of like permissionless. So when you stake your Pol, you'll be able to participate in multiple roles, as we call them. So you'll be able to stake for Polygon POS, which it will migrate to Oblivion. You'll be able to stake for IMX zkVM. Pol will be the staking token there, even though IMX is the gas token. You'll be able to stake for like a whole host of other decentralized sequencers, decentralized infrastructure, right? So if you're a game developer, you might want to have a smaller piece of data availability. You might not need the full decentralization of Ethereum DA. You might not need the full decentralization of Celestia DA, right? Maybe you just need a few nodes. And you just want it to be more decentralized than AWS, right? Because your users are already trusting you not to rug the game. And so there's a fair amount of trust going on. They can also trust a less decentralized data availability solution. So we have local data availability as an option where you can go to the Pol stakers and say, hey, I need 3-4 nodes to provide security, to provide DA for my blockchain, right? I'll pay 1,000 Matic a month, or 10,000 Matic a month, or 50,000 Matic a month, whatever, to each of these stakers. And it might not be Matic, it might not be Pol, it might be your native token, it might be USDC, it could be wire transfers if you want to go off chain with it, right? But the important thing here is that it becomes a marketplace for security. So you can go to the market and say, I want to buy this for this price, and people in the market can say, I'm willing to sell you this for a different price, right? And you can sort of meet in the middle. That's a much more permissionless, like parameterized, computer legible format relative to like the setup on, say, the Atom Hub, right? Which this has always been the difficult thing, is you have to coordinate people in order to get shared security on the Atom Hub. It's very difficult. For an average developer, they don't want to have to call someone, right? They don't want to have to make a governance proposal. It's the same issue with like Arbitrum and their L2s and L3s. Like, people don't want to interact with people. I barely want to be on this webinar right now, right?
I take no
like,
offense.
I'm just kidding. But like, once you have that sort of like more machine to machine marketplace for security, it's going to open up the options pretty substantially, akin to what like Eigenlayer is doing. Anywhere that you need secure decentralization, you can get it through the Polygon staking hub, and Pol token will be the staking asset of choice there, right? Although we will also implement multi-token staking. Maybe you have to stake some Pol and some other token in order to secure the sequencer on whatever chain, right? It's the crux of it is that it's very flexible, it's automatable, and it's open and permissionless. So it's much less centralized than something like an Eigenlayer, which is probably like the closest comparison, right? You still get like hyper productivity of your asset. So the way we think about productivity, I kind of like this meme actually. So you have Bitcoin. It's not a productive asset. You can't borrow and lend with it. You can't do anything with it on chain other than hold it, right? And transfer it. Then you have Ether. And because of proof of stake, Ether is a productive asset. You can stake and provide security to the Ethereum blockchain. It pays you whatever percent APY in exchange for that. So it's productive. Then we have Pol, which is more like hyper productive, right? The idea being that like this economic security can still be used on multiple chains, right? And you can still put up your tokens to get slashed if you misbehave, but you can provide that security across like effectively infinite applications. And I think this is the way that we get staking as like an economic primitive to scale to the scale that we're going to need when the whole world's internet runs on decentralized rails. So with Polygon 2.0, we have these different components. We have block space that can scale infinitely because it's cheap to submit your proofs to the AG layer. We have liquidity that can scale to wherever it's needed, right? So we've unified liquidity across all the different chains. And we have security that can scale to whatever degree that it's needed as well. And as a result, Pol stakers will be able to earn a lot more yield on their asset. And if we've learned one thing about crypto participants, we love our APYs. And so nobody's got like their gun to your head telling you what you need to secure and what you need to not secure. And there's no like centralized vector the way that like Eigenlayer is going to have it, where if there's a slashing, there's like 8 humans that get to decide if they want to roll that back or if they want to proceed with it, right? There's just so much more trust involved in like a centralized committee like that. With the Polygon staking hub, it's all automated, right? And you'll be able to choose what risks you want to take with your assets every single time. And so to me, that's a much better model because it enables people to participate on both sides of the market to the degree that they want.
Excellent. Thank you for that. One more question on the technology front, and then Colin, I promise we're going to bring you into this conversation. But just, so Polygon launched the chain development CDK in August of last year. And we've seen announcements around several protocols like Celestia, Near, and recently Libra have already begun to use this. Can you give us a high-level overview of the CDK and how it impacts the blockchain development space and why teams are choosing to build on it?
Thanks. Yeah. So CDK, I would frame it as our version of either like the Cosmos SDK or the OP stack, right? The key differentiators are there's a couple. The first one is you get ZK security out of the box, right? For a lot of builders, that's like non-negotiable because they know that in order to have any meaningful amount of user activity, people don't want to make trust assumptions, right? They're like ZK aligns much more well with crypto values than an optimistic rollup framework or a standalone sidechain does. So CDK is our software stack that makes it super easy to implement an L2. Like I've seen people at hackathons stand one up in a half hour. It's pretty amazing. The other thing that CDK gets you though, and I think this one like goes a little bit unnoticed, is it gets you access to the AG layer. It gets you access to that like interoperability and cheap like submission of proofs in a way that none of the other stacks do. And so it's a little bit like why do you build on Cosmos SDK? It gets you access to IBC, right? That's a way for your chain to live not just as an islet, but as part of like a broader ecosystem. Being IBC enabled is this huge advantage for Cosmos chains relative to not enabling IBC, right? It makes it safer, so your users don't have to trust like custodial bridges. It makes it easier for people to get liquidity on and off of your chain. And it makes it easier to do user acquisition as well, right? Because you're part of that same ecosystem. With Polygon CDK, I think of it actually very similarly. You notionally you use CDK because it's the best, easiest way to deploy an L2 and get the full security of Ethereum in the process. But under the hood, the reason that you do it is to get access to this aggregator layer. That's really like the killer feature in my mind. And I think a lot of the chains today might not even realize that. But as time goes on, it's going to become much more clear that like this is what we're playing for. The aggregator layer is like the crux of the Polygon 2.0 like architecture, right? And if you fork the CDK, that's fine, right? All of our code is open source. You can fork our prover, you can fork our CDK, you can fork any part of our stack, the virtual machine, whatever you want. But you'll never be able to fork the network effects that the aggregator layer provides you, because it makes it cheaper to submit your proofs when you have a whole bunch of chains there, and it brings in all of that liquidity. Liquidity can't get just like forked or copy pasted. I mean, that was basically what happened with FTX, unfortunately. Like liquidity is the one thing in the space that really can't be copy pasted, right? It is that network effect driven thing. And so I think the core reason why you'd want to use it is actually the aggregator layer access. Even though, like, look, if you didn't want to touch the aggregator layer, which I'm sure some teams won't, right? And you want to pay more for all of your proof submission, you don't want to access the shared liquidity, I'm sure people will choose that, right? And it's just a fantastic like software for developing L2s on its own. But for most teams, it is about that network effect. And we've seen how popular this is in the market, right? We've seen something like 15 chains already announced, and these are like big, well-informed players, right? So these are people that are either coming from other ecosystems, like we have A-Star coming from the Polkadot ecosystem, right? They're not seeing the user traction they want there. They are not satisfied with the level of security that their chain has. They want to build on Ethereum. They want access to Ethereum liquidity. They want access to Ethereum users. How do you do that? You can join the Polygon ecosystem. So we made it really easy if you're EVM compatible to do that. It's the same story with Canto, really, right? They were part of the Cosmos ecosystem, and they looked at it and they said, look, like the liquidity is not scaling the way that we want. The user base is not scaling the way that we want. User acquisition, liquidity acquisition, bridging assets, it's all difficult and clunky and somewhat centralized. We need a better place to build. And so they've come in and chosen Polygon CDK as the way to do that. You see this with IMX, right? They've taken a few shots on goal here. They've got their other chain, right? And it's pretty interesting that like when we talk to teams in the gaming space, they always get the choice of where they want to build, obviously. And hands down, when IMX says, "Hey, do you want to build on our old chain or on our layer 2?" They're like, "Of course, the layer 2, because I'll get access to liquidity, I'll get access to users, I'll get access to Ethereum mindshare and alignment, and I can write all my contracts in Solidity, right?" And so we've seen kind of like the appeal from that end. We've seen a lot of new CDK chains, so a lot of chains that like people are, I think L2s are kind of going to be the L1 or the alt L1 of the cycle. We're just going to see so many of them launch because it's a great product, right? It's like an L1, except you don't have to bootstrap value to your token, so you can put your head down and actually focus on building, and also you can collect sequencer revenue, which is awesome. And it doesn't take that much to make it worth it to launch the chain in the first place. So we're seeing CDK also be like the place of choice for new chains like X1, right? And we internally talk a lot about scaling. I don't know if I'm supposed to say the exact number, but it would blow your mind the number of chains that we see coming in 2024. And we've already got like a pretty good start on that, and I think we're only getting started. I would expect to see the adoption scale up exponentially from here.
Excellent. Okay, well, we're going to definitely stay tuned and watch for that. Turning direction just a little bit. So HSBC performed a live demo of Polygon ID at Hong Kong FinTech Week. I believe it was last November. This showcased pretty exciting potential for decentralized identity within the financial services space. Can you explain what is decentralized identity and Polygon ID specifically, and what Polygon ID addresses, how it addresses the challenges of KYC and data privacy in like sort of the traditional banking sector and, maybe even other areas as well?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, Polygon ID is something that I'm super excited about, right? I think if you think about ZK Tech, we've spoken so far about all the ways that it enables you to scale in a secure way, to get like secure cross-blockchain communication. But there's a whole other angle here, which is privacy. And ZK is a very powerful tool that can enable user privacy and data ownership going forward. So the way that I think about it is ZK can allow you to prove something without revealing everything else. So Polygon ID works on this sort of approach where you have credential issuers and then you have applications that consume the credentials. So for example, if I want to buy a tokenized version of, I don't know, Tesla stock, right? Well, in order to do that in a compliant way, I have to prove that I'm, a US citizen. I have to prove that I'm above a certain age, right? And all of the other things to comply with like SEC regulations around participating in the US capital markets, right? Today, the only way that I could do that is by sharing all of my identity information with my broker. And, I feel like it goes without saying, but like, I don't like sharing all my data with everyone, right? It's just like an overreach of privacy here. It's like I have to KYC to buy, you can see a world going forward where I have to KYC to buy a bagel, right? And the thing is, if I go into a bar, they don't need to know my address. I might not want the bouncer to know my address, my phone number, whatever. I might just want to prove that I'm over the age of 21, right? That's the relevant thing here. They might not even need to know my name. All they need to know is that I'm a person that has the attribute of being over 21. And so you can see kind of like the real world parallel where it's about selective data disclosure, about being able to own your data and choosing who gets access to it as appropriate. So that's one angle is the privacy side. The other side, and I think this is huge, especially in the tokenized asset space, is around interoperability and portability of credentials, right? So if I'm a US resident over the age of 21, I might not just want to participate in buying Tesla stock, but maybe I want to buy a mutual fund issued by HSBC or something, right? And they might need to check these credentials. Right now, I have to go in and type all of my personal data again into somebody's centralized database, and I don't know what kind of security they have around it. And it's a real friction point, right, for user onboarding. And there's a reason that like once people choose a credit card, once they choose a bank, like that's it, right? And the highest ROI period of time for banks to advertise to people is right before they set up their direct deposit at a new job, right? And like huge amounts of advertising budget at consumer finance businesses go toward targeting people right out of college, right? Because once they set up their direct deposit in their first job, they're just going to continue using that bank account for everything going forward. But that's not how it should be. The global financial system should work for people the same way it works for institutions. It should be the fact that like whatever opportunities are legally available to me are always legally available to me. And it shouldn't be the case that like I have this huge amount of overhead to go through and jump through hoops and type my information into a database and risk myself, like risk my data privacy, risk suffering a hack every time I want to get access to some financial product. And that's kind of part of the vision behind crypto is like not having to go through centralized entities to do this. How do you square that away with compliance though, right? Like we still want to make sure that like North Korea doesn't have access to US capital market opportunities, right? We want to make sure that people are able to access things in a responsible way, and that people aren't getting like scammed all the time. So what you can have is portable credentials as well. So I could have a proof on chain that I am, say, a U.S. citizen as done, KYC by whichever KYC company I want. And then as long as the institutions that issue these assets are willing to trust that KYC company, and there's only like 3, right? I mean, we've all been there. Sign up for a centralized exchange, you type in your name, your address, they make you take a selfie. Like there's like 3 APIs that everybody's hitting under the hood. There's no reason why different entities shouldn't be able to accept these credentials in a way that respects my privacy and also the safety of my personal data. So you can imagine a world where this bank might not even need to know my name. All it needs to know is that this address has access to a credential that proves that I am not a citizen of a country that's not allowed to hold this asset. It doesn't even know which country I'm in, right? It's just about like privacy, disclosing personal data exactly to the degree that's necessary by law, and then that's it. And for all the rest, I don't have to worry as much as a consumer. So it's better for customer acquisition. It's like a way smoother onboarding experience to have portable credentials, right? And it's better for me as the user because I don't have to engage nearly as much trust in these centralized entities.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Certainly a great use case for blockchain technology. Colin, I promised we were going to start to engage you. So let's talk about partnerships, because I know Polygon has had a pretty significant partnership strategy. What does the strategy look like for 2024? Can you share any insights on particular areas of focus or industries that you're going to be target for collaboration?
To be clear, Heidi, I think the vast majority of the people in the industry wake up excited to hear what Matt has to say and not what I have to say. To go deep into the tech.
Don't sell yourself short.
Yeah, well, I could speak about that. I love rapping with Matt on that stuff because it's some of the most impressive technology I think we've created in history in terms of what it does for humanity. But those are probably kind of personal views and people that are deep into crypto. In terms of the quote unquote business side, we don't look at them necessarily as partnerships, but these are collaborations. I think Polygon can be better thought of almost as like Linux, right? It's a free software. It's a platform for which anybody can take and build. And you can think of the idea that, there's an argument that Amazon wouldn't have made it past the first 10 years if it didn't have Linux as kind of a free platform. So I think that's the way Polygon envisions itself, is really a decentralized organization. We're not necessarily partnering in the way that you're going to do X part of the work and we're going to do part of the work, but it's more like we understand this technology really, really well because a lot of it was created in-house. And so we're here to provide that education for you to use it and take it in the direction for whatever use case you might choose. And so as discrete examples of that and getting into particular areas of focus or industries, I would probably highlight 3. So if you think of the announcement that went out the other day with regards to Fox News using Polygon technology as a way to prevent people from believing that a video comes out, essentially it's fake news, right? This is the prevention of the spread of fake news, where a media participant can verify on the blockchain that this media was created by them. And so these are kind of this is one of the ideas that I personally get excited about. Do you think coming into the new election that this is going to be a very, very hot topic? Mm-hmm. It's cool to be able to allow people a way to understand ultimately what's true and what's not. It's something that we have a significant challenge with, quite frankly, in America. There's a ton of disinformation. The internet and technology is only exacerbating that challenge. And hopefully this technology allows, to some degree, people to dial that back and bring it back to the point where it's just more clear what reality looks like. And as a people, as a civilization, we can align on a vision of reality that we share, as opposed to one that's disparate and divides people. So that's kind of one area I think that you can see more of a future developing in is this kind of interaction with artificial intelligence, and especially as it is involved in kind of creating data that may or may not be essentially real or valid or a version of the truth. And then there's 2 others that I would also highlight. One, I would focus, I think what I see evolving is this ability for global loyalty programs. Like, you think the percentage of revenues that an airline actually makes, it's actually based on their loyalty program. It's not even necessarily based on, amount of tickets that they sell, or people would think of as their traditional business model. you could think of it as blockchain integrates more with loyalty programs. You can do cool things like take the loyalty points that you get from one platform and trade them on another. And I foresee these in the coming year as becoming very, very active markets based on the folks that I know that are building up Polygon. And these are, call it just major global brands. And I think that the things that will enable over time are just going to be really exciting. Like really big markets spring out based on the technology where there was just no prior market before. So I think it's going to make it a much more usable experience for the end customer. And then third, I of course always from my seat speak about the rewiring and re-engineering of the global financial system. For Matt and I on the institutional side, that's always around the hoop in conversation. It's an area where I focus a lot. And I think, and the people that I speak with regularly see 2024 as really the year where that scales. Like inflection point happened in 2023. The year where a lot of these ideas scale happens in 2024.
Excellent. I think that's a really good segue into, I want to talk about RWAs, tokenization. Just like a week ago, Libra, a joint venture between Brevin Howard's WebN and Nomura's Laser Digital, announced their purpose-built L2 for tokenization built on Polygon CDK. Can you talk to us a little bit about what this means for institutional adoption and just how big of an advancement this is?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I could spend a long, long time on this. So I think most important to understand for everybody on this call is the why. Like, why is this important? What are the drivers behind it? How relevant? So Libre, for the first time, I think, is the big business-to-business unlock, whereby you start getting private assets and private equity assets specifically, and alternative assets into the hands of a much greater, more diverse range of people. And I would try to give a high-level framework just to help everybody understand like why this is happening and maybe some indication as to how quickly it will happen. There was a good report by Bain Capital the other day, and the report essentially said there's a $400 billion revenue opportunity for alternative investment managers that can be unlocked by blockchain. So if you think of that in terms of an incentive, why Wall Street is largely adopting these technologies, it's not because some major player, like head of a top 10 global financial firm wakes up and says, this is an awesome technology. They say, this is a great way to increase our revenues and make money, right? Wall Street is largely driven by making money and saving costs. And so how the model works that I've seen is the idea is essentially half the world's assets are owned by individuals. The number that I've seen, everyone has a different number. It could be like $150 trillion in assets are owned by individuals, with the rest being owned by entities. Of the half of the 50% of assets that are owned by individuals, people with a net worth under $30 million have essentially zero exposure to private equity assets and alternatives. And so if you look at more like the endowment model, where that exposure to private equity and alternatives would be 25% or 40% of their portfolio, and you could think of people in the high net worth or very high net worth segment, call it between $1 million and $30 million, and they currently have essentially zero exposure to what has over the past couple of decades been a higher returning asset class than public assets. You can paint a picture and create an argument that as that exposure goes from 0 to 5% to between 10 and 20%, there's a massive, massive shift in capital that's going to happen over the course of call it the 5 to 10 year time horizon. You're essentially creating an entire market around private assets that's going to spring up in parallel with the current existing public infrastructure. And the cool part is it's all going to integrate into the current infrastructure. It's not like we're disintermediating the banks. What we built over the past 100 years goes to zero. That's not why the traditional financial institutions are adopting this. It's because it can ultimately integrate and grow the pie, grow the global pool of assets that is traded. And the cool part from our seat in the blockchain side is that a lot of this stuff will happen on chain. And it happens on chain because it makes more sense in a lot of ways. It happens because once you fractionalize an asset, you can lower the minimum from, call it like a $5 million number to a $10,000 number. And then you can package it in such a way, and this is where Libre comes in. you could package it in such a way when the person goes into their private bank and speaks with their private banker from JP Morgan or Goldman Sachs or HSBC, all the major global organizations, for the first time, that ultra high net worth or high net worth manager will say, what do you think about a 5% allocation to this asset class? And tokenization will be the way that you can access that. So we kind of love abstracting the tech away for a lot of people, right? Like your average citizen, like when they listen to, Matt go through like why he's excited about technology, the eyes are going to glaze over. All they will see is essentially for the first time, they can have a part of their portfolio returning, call it 15%, with a certain, risk-adjusted rate of return. But what it represents really for them is diversification. And it's almost that simple, right? It's what you get is diversification. The cool parts about it and why the blockchain side of it is important is because you can, in the future vision, allow for collateral, borrow and lend. You can borrow against your held assets on the blockchain. You trade it 24/7. There's more liquidity. And most important, I think, down the road is transparency, right? Full transparency, which you don't currently have. And I think those are the ideas that tip the technology in the favor of mass adoption by the global institutions and entities that will adopt it. And then, of course, it's a greater offering ultimately for the customer.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to pause there because I know that was a lot to unpack.
Yeah, that was a lot. I mean, let's, maybe continue with like some of these big numbers that are being touted out there. So according to DeFi Llama, real world assets currently hold a TVL of 5.6 billion. Lots of reports, you had mentioned the Bain report, but there's also HSBC and Northern Trust. They predicted earlier this year, roughly 5 to 10% of all assets will be tokenized by 2030. That's like 19.5 trillion. I mean, do you think these numbers are achievable? But I think more importantly, what's your strategy, Polygon strategy to RWAs, and how are you positioned to take advantage of this new market?
Yeah, I would say that the current numbers of TVL are very small relative to the world's global financial markets. And I do believe as the blockchain is increasingly integrated into the core architecture of the existing financial system, you will see those numbers increase dramatically. Like from our perspective, we see more like a 50 to 100x type of multiplier on what you see now. So what's happening now and the TVL numbers that are thrown around, they're relevant, but that's just the seed of, I think, what everybody sees. So when HSBC comes out and says, here's a number for 2030, I think it's achievable. It's really tough to see like if we're going to fall short of that or go beyond that. But I believe directionally they're correct in their idea that what you will see in 7 or 10 years is a significant multiple of what you're seeing now with the tech being in its very early stages. How important is our RWAs to Polygon strategy? Yes, it's very important, but it's one of, call it like 4 or 5 verticals within Polygon that I think this technology is a perfect fit for. And I think Polygon has a very deep offering in each of those, call it use cases or verticals, right? Think about the partnership, the collaboration with IMX. Think about any of the other kind of number of announcements that have come out. Really, this idea of financial market disintermediation and more like democratization and inclusion in that side, that's only one aspect of the broader picture. And to some degree, these all integrate, right? The financialization of things that weren't previously, call it like financial instruments. And even NFTs can be thought of as something for which this is an integration, and there's a lot of overlap. So I would look at these things as, you almost can't disentangle these ideas one from the other at its core, and especially as more of these virtual assets come on blockchain. In terms of, call it why an RWA issuer should issue their token on Polygon, our vision is largely around zero knowledge. So it's challenging for, I think, us to paint a picture of a future where billions and billions of dollars in traditional value, traditional assets, real world assets are exchanged without the highest level of security. Yeah. And for us, I think that's what zero knowledge represents. And that's why that technology is so important for the RW space in particular.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And just, sort of when we're thinking or looking at RWAs, we've seen lots of like real estate, artwork, private credit, tokenized treasuries. So, RWAs appear to be trying to integrate like many different sectors all at once, in some cases creating fragmented or illiquid on-chain markets. What sectors, or which sectors do you think holds the most potential for growth and further tokenization in 2024 specifically, but even longer term?
I don't want to. I almost don't want to speak directly to individual aspects of this, because I don't want to disenfranchise anyone. Like, people come to us all the time and they're really excited. They're like, "We're tokenizing this or that," and I support all of that, right? I want to see that, but I could tell you what I think gains adoption more quickly than other areas, because there are certain areas of the market that lend itself to more rapid adoption, given where we are now with the technology. I would say, based on what I see in the pipeline, you're going to see a lot of fund tokenization. You've already seen that start, call it with like money market funds. It's probably not the most exciting use case for most people, but it's where it starts. So you're going to see a lot of fund adoption based on the $400 billion number that I mentioned with the Bain report. You're going to see a lot of, call it, private equity funds, alternative investment managers looking to tokenize so they can further extend their range of distribution and increase their assets under management. And then you're going to see things that are already essentially a digital asset, right? Like stocks and bonds, and to some degree structured products and derivatives are already largely virtual in nature. So that there's less of a hurdle to tokenize those assets and bring them on chain than there is for something, call it like real estate. With the idea that yes, there's a multi-trillion-dollar picture in global real estate, you start running into real world challenges, like who holds the deed to my house, right? If I want to fractionalize my house and rent it out on the weekend virtually, the challenge is that if somebody comes for ownership rights, they have to go down to the courthouse and speak with the registrar. And that's, I think, where the challenge comes from, getting further down the pipeline or the funnel from things that are already relatively virtual to the things that are clearly completely not virtual. And you need some sort of an oracle. You need some sort of way to bridge where those assets sit now with an on-chain representation.
Mm-hmm. And maybe just to kind of close out this whole discussion around RWAs, tokenization. So early last year in February, Siemens issued its first digital bond on Polygon. And my understanding, it really shortened the settlement period from 7 days to just 1 day, which is pretty incredible, really de-risking its whole like issuance process. So, thinking about that, what other industries or sectors could similarly benefit from adopting tokenization, and how might it transform their operational models?
Yeah, the challenge is just providing one answer. One that's come up. So first, you have to get through all of, call it, traditional finance in terms of putting them on chain, de-risking their platforms. The Siemens example was great, but it was a very early instance. First, you really need to see wide use of that technology to de-risk settlement times globally. Like, think about receivables or things that could even be, call it like 28 days to settle, down to essentially like atomic settlement or same-day settlement or 1 hour settlement or whatever it is, instant settlement. I think that's the first step in the process. In terms of other industries, I've seen gigantic numbers around non-financial industries, including things like the supply chain. Yes, I've heard people in these businesses espouse tremendous benefits from adopting tokenization coming on chain, but the ones that aren't being talked about as much right now have additional technological and real, I would call it regulatory, potentially even regulatory hurdles before they can fully come on chain and completely disrupt the operational model that they have. So I think that's going to be maybe we'll have more on our next quarterly call. But for now, I think I'm going to leave it at a very, very high level answer.
Okay, fair enough. So we've covered quite a bit in this short amount of time. But so to summarize, what are the top 2 to 3 narratives for Polygon that we should all be paying close attention to this year? And maybe, Matt, we can kick it off with you, and then Colin, get your take as well.
Thanks. Okay, so I think this is pretty clear for me. The first one is very much the ecosystem around Polygon CDK. So it's the sheer number of chains, the number of users, the number of apps, the amount of activity that's going to come into this ecosystem is just going to be unreal. And it will create like the core gravity that really it really squashes this question of like whether Ethereum can scale, whether Ethereum will make it this cycle. I think it's going to be abundantly clear that like yes, but through Polygon CDK, right? Just the size of that ecosystem is the first thing that I would be on the lookout for this year. It's already started and it's just going to grow. The next piece I think is around the interoperability layer, and this is the AG layer, the interop layer, whatever you want to call it. I think that it's one of those, sometimes in crypto you have these technical things that like go unnoticed until they really change what's possible. And this is going to really change what's possible. And I think it's easy to sleep on the progress that we're making toward that because it is so technical in nature. But just imagine the possibilities if we could have truly safe interoperability across blockchain platforms. That's what ZK Tech brings to the table when it comes to the interop layer. So I think that just the amount of possibility there is massive, and it's going to hit us all in the face like as soon as it starts to reach like adoption. So those are the two things to look out for.
Excellent.
Yeah, and I'm really going to have to piggyback on what Matt said. I think this year is all about liquidity aggregation. So we have a cool global platform. The challenge, I think, is siloed liquidity, islands of liquidity. Using zero knowledge, I think for the first time, we can really connect disaggregated or disparate sources. So call it the Polygon 2.0 roadmap and vision, and the CDK technology are core to the idea that we can really make this a usable technology by bringing everybody together. Right now, I think there's a lot of kind of silos and camps within blockchain. And I think for the first time, this technology really has a shot at essentially bringing them all together. The technology at its core is really about alignment. And one of the things that I'm most excited about in terms of narrative for 2024 is really having a quantum leap forward in aligning everybody into this space to where somebody's win is the ability to connect somebody else over here and do something that they really couldn't do before. And if you think about blockchain in terms of network effects, the network effects, in my mind, based on what I see as the technology really enabled by zero knowledge, the network effects are about to explode.
Excellent. And in our last minute together, just personally, what are you guys most excited about in 2024? Crypto markets, personally excited about.
Mm-hmm. In the markets, I think that I think in the short run, it's easy to underestimate just how important the Bitcoin ETF is, right? And in the medium run, it's going to be insanely impactful. And my definition of medium run is a crypto definition of medium run, months, right? In the coming months, we're going to see just how important this is. And we're going to see how much it unlocks people's ability to participate and get curious about crypto. We all remember what it was like falling down the rabbit hole. You start with Bitcoin, you're not going to stop there, right? And I'm really excited just for all of the people around me to understand what I'm talking about when I talk about things like layer twos. I'm excited to see all the cool things that they build. I think it's going to bring an enormous amount of talent, curiosity, and capital into the space. And I think it's going to be like the bull market of all bull markets. It's going to be so much bigger than ever before. And I couldn't be more excited about it.
Well said. Let's hope that's all true. Colin, over to you.
Yeah, I think something that's going to enable what Matt just said is really the establishment coming on board with crypto. Regulatory unlocks that I see in the pipeline are tremendously exciting for me. I think 2024 we're going to look back and see it as kind of like a watershed year in terms of the year that mainstream society and the governmental infrastructures that kind of globally dictate what we do as a civilization becomes more accepting of this technology. And I think even in the next couple months, you're going to see some significant headway towards that. So broadly speaking, today there was this idea that, it's almost like choke point 2.0 is the government going to try and kill crypto around the world? I think we're past that at this point. And I think that as you do see more acceptance, the markets are just going to be much more exciting in terms of what you can do, use cases, adoption, and general participation in the space, really enabled by acceptance from, call it the people that really call the shots in our society at this point.
Excellent. I love it. We're ending on a high note. That's amazing. So yeah, we're out of time, unfortunately, though I think we could have gone on for another hour at least. But this wraps up the this edition of the State of Polygon quarterly call. Amazing updates. Looking forward to next quarter, Colin and Matt, hearing more great things about Polygon and successes going forward. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks, Heidi. It was a pleasure to be here.
Thanks.